The fallout from Britain's EU referendum has changed the face of British politics in rather unexpected ways. It was only weeks after the referendum that Britain had a new Prime Minister, and the second time that the country was governed by a woman, and a Conservative woman. But this seeming process of the feminisation of British politics wasn't confined to the Conservative Party, nor was it confined to British politics for that matter. Women were coming into their own across party lines and across borders. Many explanations for the rise of women were emotional and intuitive rather than historical or structural. There was a lot of talk that women were cleaning up a man-made mess in politics, that women were the healers of rifts caused by man and by a masculinized way of conducting business, and that women brought their unique gifts as the gentle sex to diplomacy and to the politics of conciliation and consensus. All of this language and rhetoric was inevitably essentializing and replete with stereotypes that we may have hoped we had seen the back of after two tall waves of feminism and women's liberation. What could be heard in much of this dialogue and public discourse were strong echoes of the past, and in particular, the language, the gender polarization, and the anxieties about women's politicization that accompanied the suffrage movement and the aftermath of suffrage in the 1920s and 1930s. Indeed, this is the area of my research. And as in 2016, in 1918, much hope was invested in women to be the world's healers after a man-made war. Women were enfranchised in March 1918, and the first woman fought to win parliamentary seats in December of that year. Only the Sinn Féin candidate won, and she refused to take her seat. Nonetheless, this first election was a momentous one in women's history. It was highly important symbolically, as women over the age of 30, don't forget this was only partial women's enfranchisement, flocked to polling stations, often in groups, to cast their votes for the nation's government for the first time. In the years after women's presence in the electorate, and even more so when they represented more than 50% of the electorate with the equal franchise, the nature and the tone of politics changed. We might have felt that what was happening in the summer of 2016 was really unprecedented, but my research on women in politics between the wars suggests that there are distinctive patterns and processes at play. What's even more striking is that women have made the inroads they have in the Conservative Party. Theresa May is the second Conservative woman Prime Minister, and although she's not simply Margaret Thatcher Mark II, she leads a party that has had a much more ambivalent, if not hostile, relationship to women's liberation, and certainly to second-wave feminism. We need to be cautious not to stereotype Conservative women, and the story of women in the Tory party is much more nuanced than we might expect. This was something we were able to explore in some detail at the conference I co-organized at the Conservative Party Archive in Oxford in 2015. The Baroness Jenkin, the co-founder of Women to Win with Theresa May, gave one of the keynotes. One issue we kept on coming back to was the perceived anti-feminism of the Tory party and how accurate that really was. As just one example, Britain's first woman MP to take her seat was the Conservative Nancy Astor. Astor stood out in many ways, and she considered herself a feminist and a representative for women as a whole. Now, this was very different to Thatcher's attitude, and not all roads lead to or from Margaret Thatcher. As women lead across Europe and across the globe, with the distinct possibility that America will have its first woman president in Hillary Clinton, we can look to the past to illuminate our present. This may well be a golden age for women in politics, but we shouldn't lose sight of the ideological and personal diversity among these female politicians. It's very important to differentiate women in politics from women's politics. The increased presence and profile of women in politics might contribute to a process we might call feminization, but that is not one and the same as these women leaders fulfilling feminist aspirations. History helps us to trace the various ways in which women can and do engage in politics and perform leadership. It does not help us make predictions as such, but rather reminds us that nothing is entirely unprecedented or really that unpredictable.